morning, everybody, and welcome to, it's our first CPD of September, which is really exciting. And as you can spy, we've got three lovely guests with us today, which is the lovely Liz, Fatima, and Miss Liz. And we've just popped on their social media handles there, but don't worry, you'll have the opportunity to note them down again, and you can check them out afterwards. So a warm welcome to you all. This session is aimed to give you some strategies, some ideas and some support if you are tutoring for the 11 plus, specifically the English side of things, and hopefully give you some practical tips. There will be some Twinkl resources featured, some lovely example questions and some general ideas to help you along the way from our three lovely guests this morning. We'll be covering reading comprehension, SPAG, vocabulary and touching a little bit on well-being, all areas which are critical to the success for your students who are taking the 11 plus. And we're hoping that by the end of the session, you'll leave with some really nice fresh ideas, maybe a little bit more confidence as well, perhaps some new folks to connect and meet on social media as well. And also we will be showcasing some of Twinkl's 11 plus resources, including our snazzy new sample free workbook too. So it will be really nice if you do have any questions. Don't worry if we can't answer them straight away. As the lovely Helen said, we will try and conduct a little bit of a Q&A if we have time towards the end, where we can pose those to myself and our lovely guest speakers today. And I just wanted to know as well that following on from the CPD, which is all 11 plus themed, we will also be having an 11 plus Instagram live later on in November, which will be English focused too, and a podcast episode on the very same theme that'll be aired later this year with some more insights and tips from experienced tutors. I also wanted to note that if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the 11 plus, if this is an area of tutoring which is new and you just wanted to learn a little bit more about, we do have a blog series now on our website and we'll be providing links on that. Again, you can find it on our social media pages as well. And just to note that we're here to support you every step of the way to the best of our ability. So we hope that you'll get something out of this lovely talk today. So just to note, this is some of the resources as discussed. We have baseline assessment packs, which are very handy, a free 11 plus tutor taster pack, a guide to the exams, and just as you can see here, some images which show the blogs, including one that was written by one of our guest speakers today, which is the lovely Fatima, which was focused on the topic of well-being and supporting your students when they are preparing for their exam and taking their exam. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our lovely first guest speaker, which is Liz. So Liz, if you'd like to say a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get cracking.
Thanks, Susie. Hi, everyone. Really nice to be here talking to you all today. So my name's Liz. I spent 9 years in the classroom, latterly working in a prep school, so a private primary school that goes up to year 8. So I was teaching lower key stage 3 as well as key stage 2. And for the last 4 years of that, I was head of English. So the older years in the school that I was working at operate more like a secondary school where they have specialist teachers for all their subjects. So I was just teaching English to years 5, 6, 7 and 8 then. And a big part of the role was related to 11 and 13 plus school entry assessments. So that's really where I got my kind of background with those areas. Because I was teaching in a prep school, in an independent school, my experience at that stage was mostly linked to independent senior school assessments. And then as I started to build up my tutoring on the side, I gained more experience with grammar school and academically selective state senior school assessments. So I think really, for anyone that's, that way inclined or the other way around, it was just a case of gradually building up, someone taking a bit of a punt on me for the first time when I maybe didn't have as much experience with grammar schools, and then building that up and very quickly becoming very familiar with various different forms of assessments across those different schools. And I'm now a full-time tutor, mostly in person. I do a few online sessions, and then I have some in-person group classes, and the vast majority of the sessions that I do are focused on 11 plus entry. So yeah, I'm going to talk today about comprehension. So yes, Susie, if you don't mind popping up the next slide, that would be great. Thank you. So with comprehension, obviously comprehension skills are, you know, absolutely core, and any primary teacher will have taught comprehension skills in many different forms. So I'm thinking specifically about comprehension skills in 11+ assessments. And I think the first thing to say, you know, obviously I've only got a few minutes for my part of what I'm talking about here. So this is not a comprehensive talk on everything you need to know about comprehension, but I think you know, one key area to focus on that is just so important is annotating and active reading, because I think you know, whatever form of assessment you're preparing a student for, being able to annotate a text, being able to identify the key information, key features of a text, just stands students in such a great position for any questions that will follow. So that would be my first comment, really, is to make sure that active reading is a key part of any work on comprehension. The first thing to flag, really, when it comes to 11+ assessments is that there's a real difference between multiple choice assessments and written comprehension. So different schools will take different approaches, and it's really important, if you're working with a child who's going for an 11+ assessment, to make really clear whether they're preparing for a comprehension that is multiple choice, a comprehension that is written, or a combination of the two, because some schools have multiple stages that involve both forms. Obviously, multiple choice comprehensions and written comprehensions are testing the same skills. They're testing reading skills, they're testing inference and retrieval skills, prediction skills. But there are very different specific skills that are related to each of these. So with multiple choice comprehensions, you know, they might seem to students initially as the easier version. You just got to select from A, B, C, D, or E, and it's all very straightforward. But of course, these assessments are very cleverly written. The answers are often very similar to one another, meaning that it's really easy for a student to kind of pounce on one answer and say, oh yeah, got it, that's it, that looks right. And actually they haven't spotted that there's a very similar but more accurate answer, that they can slip up there. Or also the answers may be different to one another, but they might all be linked in some way to the text. So if the text talked about a boat at some point and there's an answer talking about a boat, it might be that a student sees that and thinks, oh yeah, I remember that from the text, that'll be it. But so the way that I teach multiple choice comprehensions, or a key skill that I encourage for these, is working backwards from the point of elimination. So starting from the point of view of saying, well, I know it can't be D, that's definitely not correct. And each time you do that, you're increasing your chances of being accurate. You then have only got 4 answers to choose from, and then 3. And working backwards tends to be the best approach in terms of landing on that correct answer, because they're often so cleverly written, and while they might seem straightforward, very easy to trip up on. Whereas with written comprehensions, the skills are much more about looking at the marks available and knowing how much detail that means needing to give, looking for buzzwords in the question. So the difference between saying, for example, list or write down versus explain, and knowing that list is straightforward, you can save time there, get the information down and move on, and explain is obviously a more developed skill where you're going into more detail. You'll be using structure tools like PEE, point evidence explain, for the longer meatier answers. So just important to feel clear on the difference between the two, and early on working with a student who's doing 11+, making sure that you know exactly what form of assessment they're preparing for, because it will really impact the preparation that you're doing. So grammar schools and independent schools, you know, obviously there's not really kind of one rule that all grammar schools do this and all independent schools do that. As a general rule, grammar schools usually tend to have a first stage with a multiple choice comprehension, and then some grammar schools will then have a second stage that for English involves a written comprehension as well as a writing task. So the first stage is usually marked by computers, and it's just a multiple choice. It's, you know, A, B, C, D, E, and the second stage will be marked by teachers once the cohort's been narrowed down a bit. Independent schools often do something pretty similar, really. There's an assessment called the ISEB Common Pre-Test, which is a digital assessment that will either be taken at candidates' prep schools, or they will arrange to take it at the school if they're not at a school that offers that assessment, and that is digital, so therefore that's multiple choice as well. So it will include multiple choice comprehension questions as well as some SPAG questions, which I'll come on to. So yeah, could I have the next slide please, Susie? Thank you. So this is an example of a multiple choice comprehension question. So we've got here a quotation from the text: "Had been pushed to the brink of extinction, which of the following is closest in meaning to this phrase?" So this is just an indication of how similar these answers can be in some cases. Had been completely wiped out, had almost died out, were declining rapidly. Those three are really quite similar to each other, or share similarities in terms of the meanings. Had experienced a turnaround and were at a healthy level would be the ones that you could, you know, at an earlier point eliminate and work backwards from. But just pointing out here that it would be quite easy to say, you know, had been completely wiped out, that was the incorrect answer, but actually because it's the brink of extinction, it would be that they had almost died out. So just encouraging students to be really meticulous about working through these answers, because it's very easy to slip up with these. Okay, could I have the next slide please? Thank you. So this is an example of a written comprehension question. It says, "Look closely at this section. How does the author show Bill," so characters, "different feelings after the bomb blast here? In your answer, refer to 2 examples from the text and explain their effect." You can use quotations if you wish. So this was from an independent senior school past paper at 11+. They've been actually really helpful here because they've included the quotation from the text, the chunk of the text they're talking about, because that's a common pitfall where candidates can actually look in the wrong section for their 17 to 20. Instead of looking at those lines, they can find a quotation from somewhere else, which means that they then end up sadly losing the marks altogether. So some schools will do this, some won't. But here it's an example of, you know, really picking out the key words, refer to 2 examples, so making sure that the candidate's picking out 2 examples or 2 quotations and explaining their effect. How are these effective? So referring to, you'd be particularly looking for literary devices, so similes and metaphors, etc. Okay, and then the next slide please, Susie, when you have a moment. Thank you. So SPAG skills. So SPAG questions will often come up either as part of a comprehension or as a separate assessment that's tagged on to the comprehension component. So I've got a couple of examples here. And, you know, for a big part of it, it's all about familiarization. For digital assessments like the ISEB pretest, if you just literally Google ISEB pretest familiarization, there's ISEB have a website where candidates can have a look at what it would look like a simulation of the assessment, which is really helpful. Unfortunately, the questions are not a fair representation of how challenging the questions are in reality, so it's definitely worth mentioning that to any students that you recommend that to. But it just shows them what it would look like, where they have to click to go on to the next question, etc. So familiarization is really helpful. Key areas to look at for these SPAG assessment: parts of speech, particularly nouns, verbs, adjectives and adverbs. In the independent sector, the SPAG assessments don't tend to go in a huge amount of detail into kind of, you know, pronouns, possessive pronouns, relative pronouns. It tends to be slightly broader brushstrokes there. And then spelling skills and punctuation skills. So I've got an example here of a GL style question. So this might feature as a stage 1 grammar school question or as part of an independent school assessment. We spend May, June and July at our grandparents' house by the sea. So there's, you know, there'll be a few kind of, I would not red herrings, but things that could slip people up. So the possessive apostrophe there being after the S for grandparents, but of course, because it's a plural, that's fine. So the comma in May, but between May and June for the listing is the error there. So candidates don't need to state what the error is, they just need to select the area that contains the error, which would be A. And then finally, this is from a Twinkl resource, this second question here. This is a parts of speech question. How would you classify the word protrude? So it's important with these kinds of questions. Sometimes 11+ questions will ask a question like this about a word that could be categorized as, for example, a noun or a verb. So hug, for example, you know, could be a verb. I hug my friend. Or noun, I give you a hug. So it's always important for candidates to encourage candidates to refer back to that specific part of the text and make sure that they've looked at how the word is used in that part of the text. So that's kind of a bit of a whirlwind tour through comprehension and SPAG questions and looking at the various different forms of school assessments. But yes, I hope that was helpful, and yeah, I hope that you find the rest of the TeachMeet helpful.
Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, Liz. No, that was so many top tips there and wonderful examples. So I think people really appreciate that. Thank you so very much. So we're going to move on to our next wonderful guest speaker, which is Fatima. So Fatima, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, everybody. So my name is Fatima and I am the founder of FS Tutoring. So just a bit of background around me. So I have 8 years of teaching experience. This includes in the independent prep sector in the UK, and then I'm now a full-time private tutor. I specialise in 11+ English and interview preparations for grammar schools and prep schools. All my group sessions are mostly online, and there are one-to-one and small group sessions, and I cover comprehension, vocabulary and creative writing extensively across the different boards. So this includes the GL board, ICB, Chem and Cat4. I've successfully prepared students for some of the UK top schools, and I've included some names, so that includes Westminster, Winchester and Hampton. If you want to go to the next slide, please, Susie. So we'll start off with creative writing. So some common misconceptions around creative writing. Creative writing is a core part of 11+. Just like Liz said, comprehension, creative writing is very important as well. One of the key misconceptions that I find when I'm marking students' works and also speaking to students is the more complex a sentence, the more likely you are to get better marks. This is simply incorrect. If a student has more than one complex sentence, one after another in their creative writing, it sounds very clumsy and it just disrupts the flow of the overall work. To ensure that the student's work is flowing well, you should always aim to teach them how to use simple, complex, and compound sentence simultaneously. So it's like you're creating a rhythm with your work. If you use complex sentence consistently, that rhythm is going to be disrupted. Having said that, it is still very important that you are using complex sentences, but you need to scatter them around. And when you are using complex sentences, one of the key ways that I teach my students how to ensure that the sentence has depth and also is enhancing the overall writing is pick out a key compelling adjective. So for example, if you have an image prompt of a boat, talk about the word dilapidated. Now, often students will use the word dilapidated, but then move on and use another word like obliterated. And they'll use them one after another. And to them, they think, okay, we're using really good, compelling words, we're getting the marks. Incorrect. You're using words that, first of all, mean the same thing, and it's not enhancing your work in any way. So zoom into that keyword. How does the word dilapidated not only link back to the image prompt or the question, but how can you add a figurative language that links to the word? So this way, the story will have more depth to it, and your sentence is also delving into more detail. When I do tell students to add figurative language or use one keyword and zoom into it, they often get stuck and they don't know how to zoom into it correctly. So one way they can zoom into it is thinking critically around the image prompt and unraveling different layers around the image or the question. So ask them, if it is a boat, or let's say it's an image of a beach, instead of just talking about the water or how shiny or sparkling it is, what's underneath the water? What compelling vocabulary links with that? And then you build up a figurative language around that. All of this, of course, entails a lot of planning, so ensuring that your students are very, very well versed with planning. One really good resource that I use from Twinkl often is story mapping boxes. So I'm sure Susie or Helen can drop a link for that. That's very important as well for creative writing. Next slide, please. So the next part that I will be talking about, again, it's vocabulary, and teaching students to read in context involve several strategies. So the 5 that I will break them up to is, number 1, identify. So identify the type of word it is. Is it an adjective? Is it a noun? And read the sentence without it to grasp the overall meaning. After you've done that, focus. Use surrounding information to make an educated guess. And you can also focus on morphology, so breaking down the word. Is there a suffix? Is there a prefix in there? And what does that suffix or prefix stand for? So when you are teaching students the different prefixes and suffixes, ensure that you're teaching them what in stands for, what un stands for, because when you are then decoding vocabulary or understanding new vocabulary, they can focus on morphology. The next one is all about exposure. So exposing students to diverse reading materials from different genres to enhance their vocabulary and comprehension skills. Now, when I often speak to students and ask them what books you're reading, it's usually either fantasy, non-fiction, or fiction. Start reading poetry, diary entries, newspaper articles, or even recipe books, just because you're then showing the students different structures of different reading materials and how different words are used in different contexts. So the more you read, the more you know. The fourth one is linking. So linking new words with known vocabulary, it deepens understanding and retention. I've created a few booklets and worksheets around this that I share with my students. So if you do want access to them, please just message me on Instagram and I'm more than happy to share them. And the last one is around context. So practice using the word contextually in a sentence. Often at 11+ level, when you speak to students, they know they have a really good palette of words. But when you ask them to use them in different contexts, they use it incorrectly. It's either completely in the wrong context or they're using it in a sentence and it doesn't flow well. So when you are teaching them new words, start by asking them 2 synonyms and 2 antonyms around the word. After you've done that, ask them to create a complex sentence around the word. So this way, not only are you exploring different words around the keyword, you're also using it in a context to ensure that they know exactly what the word means and how to use it. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Fatima. Oh, some lovely tips there. I like that about the cookery books. You know, all the different types of books and genres, like you say, that's a really top tip. So thank you so much. We really enjoyed that. So we're moving on now to our final guest speaker, which is the lovely, known as the lovely Miss Liz. So if you'd like to say a little bit about yourself and we'll get cracking.
Hi everyone, so my name's Aliza, otherwise known as Miss Liz. So I'm a qualified teacher and I've had Mrs. Tutoring for a while now, and I kind of specialise in a few different areas, so okay, range, so phonics to 11+, I would say. So those are my 2 kind of main areas. And when it comes to kind of 11+, focusing mainly on the English side, but obviously going down the route obviously of verbal reasoning as well, of something that I want to discuss today. Talking about verbal reasoning, the importance of verbal reasoning and how it's so closely linked to English, because I think sometimes for some people it seems to be the case that verbal reasoning is a very separate entity to English, but in fact they are very much kind of mixed together. So I've worked with grammar schools and independent schools, and obviously the fact that it's online, you can work globally, like Fatima said, like Liz said as well, like we have, the world is our oyster, so we're able to work with schools all across the country and so forth. Ask me the geography of where that school is, not quite sure about that, but I could obviously tell you how it works in terms of the assessment side of things. So my kind of approach is very kind of multisensory, and the reason I think multisensory works best for me or my children, my students especially, is because it gets them engaged, and with the resources of Twinkl, like we'll go through, it really, really helps them to understand what they're doing, kind of the components of what they're looking at in terms of verbal reasoning. So with verbal reasoning in itself, there's about 26 styles of questions that could probably develop into about 30 styles as well from the 26. So Susie, are you happy to go to the next page? Then we can kind of go through that. Okay, so yeah, perfect. So essentially, what is verbal reasoning? So verbal reasoning is the ability to understand, analyze, and draw logical conclusions from a piece of written information. It aims to evaluate vocabulary and think critically rather than just recognize vocabulary. So it's kind of very wordy in what it's saying, but basically you're using your logical skills, you're using deduction, you're using a bit of inference, you're looking at different components of like word families, you're looking at synonyms and antonyms, you're looking at analogies, you're looking at odd words out. You're looking at sequences. So you're using lots of different kind of skills, basically to kind of enhance not necessarily just the English side of things, but also the logical side of things, the analytical side of things as well. And I think especially kind of drawing on from comprehension, like Liz was saying, for example, process of elimination, working out a meaning of the word, like Fatima was saying, kind of looking at things contextually, it's super, super important. And why I think verbal reasoning kind of connects the two is because with verbal reasoning, it's not necessarily, if, for example, you're going down, let's say, the GL route, which is majority of kind of schools will be doing that as their assessment, it would be, you'd have your sets of words, and we'll go through that in a second, but the words won't have any context. So it's kind of up to the student, or kind of the responsibility, I guess, of the student to understand that a word can be put into context in English overall, but when it comes to verbal reasoning, it won't necessarily be put into context, but then they have to work out, is it a homophone? Is it a homophone? Is it a homonym? And so forth, basically. But in terms of kind of really understanding verbal reasoning, or to basically be able to utilize it, like Fatima said, recipe books or newspapers, articles, I completely agree with that and draw on that same kind of concept, making sure they're reading a wide range of text, because there's so many new words. Vocabulary or verbal reasoning is all to do with building on your vocabulary. So there will be words, and what tends to happen is with quite a few kind of assessments, whether it's ICB, GL, and so forth, you would have there's a lot of repetition. So after a while, you can definitely kind of pick up, obviously, having done this for many years, can pick up certain techniques or certain methods that they're using, or styles of questions that they're going to be doing. So there's certain words that that will come up. So if they're doing things like that to kind of keep their mind occupied in terms of learning new vocabulary, whether it's a wide range of texts, but also different things like crosswords, Scrabble, online games, books, and of course, obviously, all the Twinkl resources that we're going to go through. But one thing I think for verbal reasoning that I find very, very useful with my students is getting an address book. Because an address book obviously is done alphabetically, and then they write down all the words. So any words that they're learning, they basically put them into A to Z. So at least that way they've got like a compilation of words that they can use and they can refer to every time. At the start, let them use that book, let them get used to it, because it's a new skill, or many new skills that they're going to have to learn to adapt to use. So let them use a book of vocabulary to kind of support them, enhance their learning, and then after a while, obviously, kind of take away that book, so it's a bit more kind of independent learning. But an address book is definitely something that I would recommend, just to kind of note down all the words, and obviously in alphabetical order. Susie, are we able to go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so within verbal reasoning, there are so many different areas. So you've got vocabulary, so you've got words in and out of context, homophones, synonyms and antonyms, compound words, so kind of putting two words together. So from that side of things, it's very much English related. So whatever your child might be doing in English, there will definitely be an overlap into verbal reasoning. So if, for example, some people might say, oh, but verbal reasoning, there's no need for them to do verbal reasoning. Well, I would kind of disagree with that, because when it comes to English, you do have to learn things like homophones, you do have to learn words like synonyms and antonyms, like Fatima has said, like Liz has said. But verbal reasoning, I guess, is probably the more relaxed version, I guess. So if your child perhaps isn't necessarily feeling so inclined to kind of go down such an intense route of kind of focusing on comprehension papers and creative writing as such, but still you want them to do something, verbal reasoning is kind of that middle ground, I would say. And then you have to kind of codes and patterns, so number sequences, alphabet relationships, so like, A to F is to B to Z and so forth, and you kind of have to work it out according to obviously the number of, jumps and so forth, and then relate that to, is it a code? So for example, if you're kind of leading to a code, is it going to lead to like a real word, or is the word going to lead to a code? So kind of looking at inverse operations, a little bit of maths kind of involved, but mainly using your logical skills. And then obviously looking at coding and decoding and so forth. Then you have like analogies and relationships. And I think why English, again, obviously is very important for this is looking at odd words out. Sometimes what tends to happen is they will kind of use questions which are revolved around word families. So for example, they might use two abstract nouns and two adjectives to kind of trick the child out. So it might be like beautiful, beauty, ugly, majesty, and they won't necessarily, they might just go for beautiful and beauty, not realizing obviously that one's an adjective and one's an abstract noun. So using or building on your verbal reasoning skills will basically over time help them with their English as well, and their comprehension obviously, and in turn their creative writing. So corresponding analogies similar to that. Then you've got problem solving, which kind of links a bit more onto the math side of things and working out, in terms of it was similar in some sense to comprehension as well. Like Liz said, like you have to kind of work out through process of elimination. Is this answer correct? Is it not so correct? And kind of work it out backwards. And then kind of letter relationships. But I'm going to give you guys a few examples now so you can see. Susie, are you able to go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so basically, if you kind of want everything in one go, you go to Twinkl's Ultimate Verbal Reasoning Pack, and they've got all of the different styles of questions. So you've got antonyms, you've got alphabet relationships, you've got odd words out. So obviously you can't, it's a little bit smaller here, but for example, if you look here in the example, oh, okay, go for it. Yeah, okay, fine. Let's do what's this one first. Okay, so for example, this is the hidden word. So you're looking for 4 letters as a hidden word. So essentially, in that one sentence, there's a 4-letter hidden word at the end of one word and the beginning of the other. So the way that I teach my students to do it is to start off with, obviously, like to use your fingers and to kind of look at the side of it, making sure obviously the word has a vowel. If obviously it's just all consonants, it's just not going to work. So for example, the black bat hid in the cave, you've got the word bath. So you've got the end of bat and then you've got hid to make the word bath. So it's a very fun approach to kind of, using different skills, and children tend to kind of really embrace it more so than comprehension, I'd say, because it's not as much kind of brain power, if that makes sense, but it's something in between. So it's a stepping stone. So sometimes perhaps, they might not want to do the comprehension, but I would say to you, still kind of get them to do some verbal reasoning because it's still going to lead to those still similar kind of skills overall. Are we able to go to the next one, Susie? Okay, so for example, this is another one. So I think, Susie, you're going to help us with this, aren't you? In terms of just looking at, so what obviously is really good about Twinkl is, other than obviously just the worksheets they've also got interactive games. So that whole kind of multisensory approach, the children feeling involved, it's great for that kind of element. So I think Susie will show us.
Okay, just checking. Everyone see that all hunky-dory there?
Yes, or I can anyway.
Oh yeah. Oh, thanks everybody for the little thumbs up. Super. Right. Okay, I'll go quiet again now.
Okay, so basically we would have to kind of just like match these up. Would anyone like to have a go, or Susie, do you want to have a go? It's up to you, but just to kind of show how it kind of basically how you would like demonstrate like how it would work kind of thing. Okay, yeah, so basically you would just match them to each one. So obviously you've got stubborn, you've got amateur, you've got achieve, flawless. Was this antonyms? It was, wasn't it? Was it? Okay, fine. So antonyms. Okay, so looking obviously at opposite words, but it's nice because even something like this will physically show the two opposites. So where obviously it's great writing it down and learning your antonyms, this will physically show them next to one another. Like this goes with this and that goes with that. You've got amateur, you've got professional, and so forth. Does that make sense? So I think if you kind of want to kind of get the children involved in terms of looking at kind of using synonyms and antonyms, trying to make it like a fun thing for them, then to definitely be using Twinkl resources, because they've basically got all the knowledge there and made it in a very well done, Susie. But they basically got all the kind of the knowledge there, but they've made it in like a really fun and exciting way for the children. So something that they can kind of enjoy. Are we able to go back to the presentation? Thank you. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so if we go to the next slide, please. Okay, so basically student wellbeing is something obviously very, very important. And I think like one of the reasons why I really think I try really hard to ensure obviously like the wellbeing of children is at the heart of teaching, is because if you don't obviously like nurture that child and give them that confidence or make them feel enabled in any way, it can go two ways. It can either go that you do enable them and they can succeed and they can flourish in their own way, or they'll kind of, curl up into a ball and not feel like they can do anything. And as us as tutors, like I've said before as well, you're almost there as kind of not obviously just academic leads, but all pastoral leads. So being there to really help that child as well. So things that I kind of do, obviously, so, building rapport with them, talking about things that they're interested in. I think I've learned so much about football now. Haven't really got a clue, but, you just kind of learn to discuss things that they're kind of like, that they find enjoyable. Like obviously you've got Twinkl here as well to be using. So if you want to play a game, so they're just like, oh, I don't really feel like doing any work, something like the antonym game for them, they will see it as, oh, it's fun, but obviously, like, you know, subconsciously it's actually a bit of work. So you're like, okay, I've solved the problem. So that's good. Rewarding effort. So for example, like, you know, sticker charts. So I do sticker charts for my students, even though obviously they're not there, but it's still something for them to feel like, okay, I still rewarded them. Obviously you can have, like, you know, dojo points and things like that as well, but rewarding the effort, because the 11 plus is such a like strenuous, intense, like arduous journey. You want them to feel like, you know, that whatever they're doing is good enough. And I think sometimes when it comes to 11 plus, mental health can also definitely be affected by it or impacted by it. But I think it's also very much important in terms of like how the tutor approaches it. So if obviously it's a very kind of intense lesson and, you know, the child is not really kind of absorbing anything, it's kind of better to just kind of, whatever that plan is for the day, put that away and do something that kind of works with them and their needs, and really focus on what's accessible for them. So if it's going at a slower pace, if it's about playing a game and so forth. And the best way obviously to do that is obviously a bit of VR, which obviously keeps the nerves away, basically.
Oh, wonderful. Thanks, Aliza. And I'm just going to bring up the verbal reasoning, the interactive odd one out there, because I just realised that I'd loaded the wrong one. So sorry there, Aliza. You handled that like an absolute pro. So I'm going to show you that. But anyway, it shows we actually have such a wide selection of them. So I'm going to bring that up. And then, Aliza, you have the opportunity to talk through that there. Okay, let's just see. There we go. Find the missing letter game.
Yeah, that's missing that. Yeah.
There we go. Lovely.
Okay, so with this, basically, you're looking for a letter that you're inserting at the end of one word and the beginning of the other. For some of my students, I tend to get them to actually, to start off with, write it out. So they physically see the one word and then they have like that last letter at the end, and then they have the word and the letter at the beginning. So they know obviously that they correlate. So then what you would do, similar to obviously like Liz says, you kind of go through a process of elimination. And then, you know, they might obviously do things like, obviously you have folk there, but obviously crawl's not going to be a word in that sense. So you would do fold, so fold and draw, and do it like that. But yeah, but basically, obviously, there's obviously many kind of like questions where they'll try to trick you out, or they'll give you a word that you think is spelled in a certain way, but it's not. So it's nice to have something like this so that they can kind of draw and make those kind of logical conclusions, but do it in a fun and interactive way. So team and many. So yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Aliza. No, that's wonderful. So we've got lots of tips there, and I think that was a really interesting point that you made as well, regarding the links between the verbal reasoning to all these, you know, other elements that both Liz and Fatima have touched upon. So for anyone who is perhaps new to the 11 plus and the English side as well, I think that's a really great explanation there. So thank you so much. So I'm just going to toggle it back to our lovely presentation, and then we'll get prepared to answer a few of our little questions as well. Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for listening. I think if anyone came, you know, with a notepad and pen, it's probably completely filled now with so many tips and strategies and ideas. And as I say, I think our wonderful guest speakers did a fantastic job, because I think as they've each touched on, the 11 plus, you know, covers so much, and this is just kind of English and verbal reasoning, isn't it? That's just kind of one side of it. So for anyone who is looking for more resources or for some advice, please make sure that you have a nosy on our tutor page, that you join our Facebook group or our Instagram, which is just Twinkl Tutors, and you'll be able to find these lovely three ladies here and connect with them if you want to ask them any further questions or see the amazing work that they do. But I'll hand over to Helen, because I think we have the opportunity to facilitate a little bit of a Q&A if possible. Thank you.